cow longevity conference today, Roger Blowey, a UK vet from England, spoke to Russian farmers about foot health and about bedding and farm cleanliness. Roger, the Russians were very keen to learn about new technologies, new ideas. Two examples of this are sand bedding and green manure bedding. Can you give us some of the pros and cons of each?
Yes, I think the for farmers in the UK particularly, the green manure bedding, or sometimes as it's called, the RMS, recycled manure solids, is a relatively new concept. And because it's relatively new, we just need, I think, to go along with it fairly carefully over a few years to see how we get on. If we go back to the sand bedding, then of course the two big advantages of sand bedding, one is cow comfort, particularly if you have a nice deep sand bed, sort of like 4 to 6 inches of sand. And sand bedding, the first advantage is comfort, and the second advantage is the low bacterial count. Because the bacterial count of sand, provided you keep it dry, is relatively low. The disadvantage, of course, with sand is the handling of it afterwards. And just to give you some idea, the average farm with a deep sand bed will be using around 8 to 10 kilos per cow per day. So
that's used when used effectively.
Yes, I think, and that's certainly not a high figure. That would be an average. That would be an average sand use. Well, if you think about that, 10 kilos per cow per day for 100 cows, that's a ton of sand per cow per day that you're putting into those beds. And if you put a ton in, then a ton, of course, is going to come out.
And be cleaned and reworked.
Yes, as we heard this morning, either it's going to be cleaned and recycled, or somehow or other you're going to get it out onto the land. Most of what I see in the general practice I work in is that the sand is just taken out and spread on the land. So the manure runs into a large outdoor pit, the sand is allowed to settle, the surface is pumped off for a few years, and then every sort of like 1 in 5 years somebody has to go in and dig the sand out of the bottom. So there's a substantial cost involved in doing that. And I think that that sort of thing, the cost, and particularly the disposal costs, has increased interest in the recycled manure solids. And of course the other thing that happened, wasn't it, was this past year the straw price went up sky high, and people were concerned about the high cost of straw. So the recycled manure solids, a really interesting concept. So you take your slurry, fresh moist slurry, extract all the water from it, and you end up with a
That's done by compressing, squeezing it through the machine?
Yes, essentially. It's a mechanical process. It's not heated in any way. It's essentially extracting the water out of the product by using a screw compress type of system. I don't know the technical detail of the machine, but it's different from the farms that are simply using a screen. So if you're simply using a screen to take the solids out and keeping the liquids, then the material that's produced then is about 40 or 50% dry matter, whereas if you're going to use recycled manure solids, you get it right down to 85% dry matter, which of course is exactly the same dry matter as straw.
Okay. On principle though, it would appear to farmers, if this new manure bedding is new, it appears a bit foolish because it will have a bacterial content higher than straw.
Well, in our laboratory, in the practice, we've done a lot of work on looking at the bacterial contents of different types of bedding. The bacterial content of the green bedding, using your expression, versus the sand, the green bedding is massively higher in bacterial content. The two major organisms causing mastitis at the moment will be E. coli and Strep uterus, and this green bedding has a very high level of both organisms. So you are putting onto the bed a material that has a high bacterial count. So therefore there is an inherent risk of an increase in mastitis. Now I choose my words carefully because it is only an increased risk. You won't necessarily get an increase in mastitis because if you if you add plenty of the material and keep it flowing across the bed and it stays dry, then I believe that that there is no additional risk. It's very good for cow comfort. Believe it or not, it keeps the cows very clean because you have this material which is highly absorbent. It can absorb a lot of water. It's interesting enough very good for teat cleaning pre-milking, because if the teats get a small amount of this material on there, because it's a fluffy material, it's very easy for the milker to remove it, maybe pre-dipping and wiping or a dry wipe. It comes off much easier than sand. But your big risk is if it gets wet, because if it gets wet, it returns to what it was, which is straightforward slurry.
So it seems that whatever solution you go for, it needs to be carried out appropriately, and it needs to suit your farm, and it needs to be done right. That's the most important thing, and it's a part of a number of management decisions that can be made to help cow longevity, which has been the topic of conversation here in St Petersburg all week. It's been Michael Priestley for thedairySite.com.